Hey everyone, it's the Kung Fu Genius, and I have a new series for you guys, and this is Legit or Nah. And I'm going to review, along with my good friend Dr. Kenneth Jay, training movie montages, right? Fighting, Kung Fu, and even non-Kung Fu stuff. And I'm going to look at it from the Kung Fu perspective. And my good friend Dr. Kenneth Jay, who's a doctor in sports physiology, is going to review it from the perspective of someone who actually knows what he's talking about. So I'm super excited about this, and let's get started. Hey, Kenneth, how you doing? It's great to see you, man.
I'm doing excellent, and thank you for having me, Alex. It's been a long time since I've seen you, man.
It has, and I just want everyone to know that this was actually your idea, and I think this was a brilliant idea. I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, I think like that's stuff like evaluating stuff like this is kind of funny because you always wonder when you watch movies, is that really real, or is that just something that Hollywood or whoever is the production country puts into it? So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the first movie we're going to do today, we're actually going to do two because they're more or less the same movie. Snake in the Eagle's Shadow and Drunken Master. These were two films that Jackie made while he was on loan from Loewe. His career was kind of going nowhere, but this producer named Sifu had this idea that he would put Jackie in a comedy instead of trying to make Jackie a tough guy. And that happened to be the formula that really worked. And so these two films for seasonal by Sifu, basically the first one was Snake in the Eagle's Shadow, and it was such a big success. They essentially remade the movie as Drunken Master, just changed the style, changed the character. But if you watch them side by side, it's almost 100% the same cast, same villains, same characters. They just change up who it is. Side by side, the movies are very similar. Drunken Master is perhaps the more famous of the two. But let's go ahead and take a look at a clip from Drunken Master, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, yeah. So there we have Deane Sek, kind of a low-tier Hong Kong actor. Now this, he plays Wong Fei Hung, and he's doing very traditional horse stance here. Obviously, he's being punished, so he has to, keep the water from spilling and keep his stance there while the incense is burning. And he has his senior there, kind of torturing him. I have a question for you because we got this recently on the podcast. Someone asked if essentially staying in a horse stance for a very, very long time is the optimal way to build that strength, or would one maybe be better served doing other exercises? About to move over to another clip, so let's talk about that a little bit. Like, is the best way to get good at a horse stance or a fixed static position just to do static positions, or would it actually make sense to have some dynamic work in there as well?
Well, at first of all, is like the isometric positions, the horse stance in this instance, is a necessary part of developing a martial artist, because one of the things that isometrics do is that they build tendon and ligament strength. So isometric positions and holding positions for maybe not like what it appears to be in Drunken Master for a very long time, but at least for prolonged periods of time, have definite beneficial effects. Now, the thing is that you also want to make sure that the resistance that you're adding, that you're fighting against in the isometric position, is high enough. And what it looks like in this position, where he's basically holding up his own body weight, and then he has his arms extended in the front with those ring weights on him. If he can do that for more than a couple of minutes, maybe 3 minutes at the most, then it's probably not enough weight. So from a punishing perspective, it's going to be miserable. From a perspective of performance enhancement for martial arts, it's not going to do much if there's not enough load on it. So that's kind of my take on that. So the exercise itself is great. It also learns you to deal with the mental challenge of being in pain, which is necessary. From a sports physiological perspective, we would probably need to add more weight to him and then reduce the time to get more benefit from it.
Got it. Interesting. Excellent. Let's look at the next one. All right. So here we have the Drunken Master kind of manipulating his student in the various positions. This is obviously you can see Jackie is doing a lot of the work himself. He's not purely being manipulated here, but this is, I think, one of the most creative training montages I've ever seen in terms of teaching such a complicated and difficult style. This is pretty amazing. And Yun Siu Tin was 65 years old in this scene. Of course, he's meant to look a little bit older than he actually is. Wow, that looks pretty painful. So I have a question here about maybe not exactly this type of thing, but obviously the drunken style is a very complicated style in terms of, motor movements, the type of coordination you need to have. So I would think this type of training is almost like a very severe version of cueing, like what you call cueing in lifting and fitness. If you had to teach someone a completely new movement pattern, something perhaps complicated like dance or martial arts or something like that, would it actually be beneficial if the trainer could somehow just manipulate the trainee into those positions, or does it make more sense for the trainee to figure it out on their own? Is it gonna sit better if they figure out how to move their arms, or is there benefit to just kind of doing it for them until they figure it out?
That's another interesting question, and I have to say with this scene, I think I saw this movie when I was 12 for the first time, and I actually tried to copy that. So I had a friend, and we tried to build those devices.
Wow.
And we just basically messed around with them for hours and hours and hours, and I ended up with very sore wrists. But the thing is, to your question, is that it actually do make sense. It does make sense to as a coach to help you guide your students through movements, especially in the first phases of it. Now, the problem here in this clip is that it really looks like Jackie is struggling all the way through to keep up. And that means that it's simply too fast. So you need, in order to have motor control and motor skill and learn to have fluency in your movements, you have to go at a pace to begin with, where your brain simply can keep up. Because if your brain can't keep up, it cannot create all those neurological connections that are necessary for you to be able to do this on your own. So you probably heard this phrase before. We both have a mutual good friend in Dr. Mark Chang, and he usually says that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And this would apply to this as well. You would want to practice this very slowly, and you would practice it with such intent to make the movements as precise as possible. If the coach is good enough to guide the student through that, then the student will automatically start to adapt those movement patterns. And then, of course, there's the whole challenge of making the proper progressions, because eventually you want to end up with being able to do this with speed, right? For fighting, because fighting does not happen in slow motion.
Right.
So the idea itself is great. How it's portrayed here in Drunken Master, I would think from a sports physiological perspective and learning perspective, is that he is really he's struggling to keep up with this, and it's probably not doing what Sohai is intending to.
Got it. All right, let's continue. Yes.
Oh,
the
yes.
famous abs routine with the cups.
Oh.
So
Yeah.
it's interesting because Si-yoon in many of his films, in the training montages, abs training seems to be a big part of it. Now, there also seems to be quite a bit of flexibility going on here, obviously. I don't think even someone with pretty good abs could necessarily do this without the requisite flexibility. So obviously from a Kung Fu standpoint, this is pretty awesome and pretty torturous, and it's great in film. Does this really make sense to train, besides it being something you could do as a performance? It's awesome, but as a training protocol, is that something that you would have an athlete do for any reason?
Well, actually, absolutely. I don't know about the water cups and that, but the exercise itself, it's actually my favorite ab exercise. Hanging upside down and then doing crunches, and again with the proper amount of loading. It is an exercise that will build a serious set of abdominals. And if we look at anatomy from the anatomic perspective of your ab muscles, they are designed to basically flex your spine. But what they also do is that they also enable stabilization of it. And one of the things that are important in fighting is the transfer of force from the ground into the fist, into the shoulder, into, if you're headbutting, into basically anything in the upper body. So if the trunk muscles are not well developed, you're going to lose an amount of force that's driven from the ground. So it's kind of like if your abs are the weakest link, you're not going to be able to take full advantage of what you can generate from the ground. And this exercise, and I would probably add in some rotational stuff as well to get the obliques, but it's very, very beneficial. And also from if we go into aesthetics, it's one of the ways that you can really build a serious set of abs from this. I absolutely love it. In this particular case, the small cups that he's using indicates that he has the endurance to keep going and going and going. I know that Jack cheats on the first one, but if I remember correctly, he splashes water on his face, walks over to Sohai and says, "I'm done now." And Sohai turns around and says, "Hey, grab these cups and now empty the water back." Smaller cups, right? Yes. And that would indicate if he's actually able to do that, he's doing way too many reps. So endurance, muscular endurance is good, but again, if it is something that you can do for like many minutes, or maybe even tens of minutes or half an hour, then the load is not high enough. That's also one of the same reasons I don't like being in a prone position, like resting on your elbows for core work for a prolonged period of time, because again, the resistance is too low. So you need to up the resistance.
Yeah, I was going to say a big thing about what makes these movies like so spectacular is you see how long they have to do something or how many reps they have to do it as being kind of torturous. But like you say, in reality, if you could actually do that one thing for that long, the load is not high enough, right? That's very interesting. All right, let's go to the next bit. I think the next bit is the famous Drunken Master push-ups.
Oh.
Yeah, these look incredibly torturous. I have to say, I've never actually attempted to do these just out of fear of my wrists exploding. I have put weight on my wrists in that direction, like statically, and I've held it there, but I never quite trusted myself to kind of hop up and off of my wrists. So before we talk about how one might progressively build up to this, is there really any merit to this type of training besides it being an awesome performance feat? I mean, considering he has to be able to hit with his wrists for this style, you have to kind of think in that frame, I suppose. But in general, would there be any good reason for a martial artist to do this?
Well, the thing is, again, and I have to go on the record here and say that I've done these.
Okay.
And I've done a lot of these, and I've jumped stairs like that.
Wow.
Up and down, and they're actually not that intimidating as you would think.
Okay.
But again, it depends on if you can control the movement or not, and if you have enough strength in your upper body, in your pecs, and in your front delts, and in your triceps and stuff like that. This is done because this is not actually a push-up. He's holding a static push-up position because his elbows don't really bend all that much. So it's basically just generating enough of a push off to flip his wrists back and forth, which means that he's not jumping very high. And that means that the load that his wrists receive is actually not that high. So it would be totally different if he jumped like you would do in a clapping push-up and then landed on his wrist, because then he would be basically falling with his upper body to the ground and then landing on the wrist. It would be much more strenuous and probably much more prone to injury of the wrist. So this is actually, I think, is interesting, because I do think that it will build some tendon and joint strength by doing this, by repeatedly taking impact. And you can kind of compare it a little bit to the hardening of the shins that Thai boxers do. Muay Thai fighters are notorious for being able to kick really, really hard. And if you feel the shin of a Muay Thai fighter, you will see that they have this thickening of the bone and thickening of the tissue that actually provides protection. And I'm pretty sure that Kung Fu trained individuals also has this, simply from all of the repeating impacts. And this is actually an example of what's called Wolff's Law in physiology and anatomy. So Wolff's Law basically says that the body will remodel itself along the lines of stress. So if you put stress on a certain body part, like you would do, for instance, if you kick something with your shin, if you would hit hardening of your hands, hitting through sand, for instance, all the type of classical stuff that you see in Kung Fu training, and also what Jackie is doing in this clip, the tissue will remodel itself because the brain kind of goes, oh, that's a lot of pressure in this area. Let me build some extra tissue there in order to protect it, because then the next time you go ahead and do it, then it won't be so hard. So I actually think there's value in something like this, but again, I don't think it should be overdone. And I think that also in this case, load will matter. So again, if you can continue to do it repeatedly, then there's not enough load on you.
And if someone wanted to develop this progressively, let's say someone had never done this before, would you recommend to hold both of the static positions and then, I mean, like, how would some, it's always it's the pull-up paradox. If someone can't do a pull-up, how do they start doing a pull-up? Well, if someone can't do this or hasn't done it, what would be, if someone came to you and said, hey, I want to be able to do this, what's the best way for me to go about it?
Okay, so if let's assume that the person is able to do a couple of push-ups, maybe a set of 10 or 15 just regular push-ups, so they have some upper body strength and some basic mechanics in place. Then I would, if there's the element of danger that's or fear of injury that's preventing them from doing it, I would basically just have them kneel down on all fours with the most of the so the body weight is not directly loaded on top of the hands, and simply just press the hands on the floor and push a little bit down and flip and see how that feels. And then I would progressively move the knees further and further back, so you would kind of be in a push-up position but on your knees. And then I would start to have them do it. And then from there, it's basically just a matter of working up to it. It's actually not that difficult, and I bet that you and many of your students would be able to do it the first time you try it.
Yeah, so we're making everyone do it next week just based on your recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can always take a little bit out of it. I've done this on concrete and asphalt and stuff like that. I've done it in a gravel field. That's not funny at all to do. But if you add some padding, like floor mats and stuff like that, you'll actually find that it's not that difficult, and it's not that intimidating after you've done it a few times. And then you can play with it if you want to. Again, I think for wrists dexterity with load, I think it has merit. It has value.
All right, and then a very similar film, Snake in the Eagle's Shadow. You see same, which actually came out before Drunken Master. Here we have the old master giving him another ab workout, and again, I suspect very similar to Drunken Master. The main thing is about the sustainability, and if it's too sustainable, I suppose then there's not enough load, right? Would you say?
Well, that kind of depends, because in this clip we actually don't see him doing a lot of reps. And it looks like he's struggling a bit.
Right.
What they're getting right here is very interesting, because this is a hip extension movement. This is like if you were to stand Jackie up and do that motion, it would be very similar to what's called a good morning from the weight room. A good morning exercise is basically you wear a barbell across the shoulders, and then you bend forward, kind of like saying good morning to people with a straight back, and it's all basically hip hinging. So take the barbell out of that and get horizontal instead of standing up straight, and then you have Jackie's position right here. So what they get right is that those muscles who does that hip extension, they're incredibly strong. So it does need a lot of load, right? So the hip muscles are the strongest muscles in the body. So that hip extension requires the load, and we see it with his trainers sitting on top of him, providing that load. Again, it may look like he's been doing that for a long time, so it may not even be enough. But from a perspective of adding body weight and having a training partner, and if you don't have any other training tools available to you, that could actually also work. I would just probably recommend some padding for your neck, because that's gonna be painful lying across those beams.
Sure, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, here, these fingertip push-ups. Well, it's actually not even push-ups. It's a static position, right? But now he's got the extra load of his Sifu pressing down on him.
Yeah.
with the added incentive to not go all the way. How much? Maybe here's something we didn't really discuss too much. How much are so these kind of things that they have, like the incense that he's burning there? Like, is that? I mean, obviously, we wouldn't necessarily do this something like that to a modern athlete, but is there any kind of negative reinforcement that's actually helpful in doing these things? Or I don't know if this is something that's been researched or looked into, like, if this type of negative reinforcement would actually improve performance over time.
Okay, so and there is actually not a lot of research, to my knowledge, that looks into this. But I'm reminded of what one of my old work colleagues said to me, because he spent 8 years in the French Foreign Legion, and he didn't know how to speak French when he got there. But from, like he said, the negative reinforcements that you get forces you to learn the language extremely quickly. Which basically means that he was beaten when he didn't understand what the orders were.
Right.
So it will force you in some capacity, because your body goes into survival mode. Using it as something in your regular training is, of course, not a good idea, because at one point you're going to start getting injured, and you may even end up, if someone else is putting you through it, or your Sifu is putting you through it, you may actually develop PTSD from it. Because the brain's ultimate goal is to protect number one, and then form other bases of survival afterwards. So that's not something I would recommend, and it's not something that I've tried myself either.
Got it. All right. There is a very cool little training sequence where he uses a bowl. Basically has to keep it upright the whole time. And obviously, there's a lot of shoulder mobility benefit to this type of thing. But in terms of kind of motor skill, I wanted to know if you could maybe say something about this type of training. This reminds me I should teach my students to practice the buji this way.
I actually love this kind of training, because what it does is that it takes focus, it shifts the focus from being internally driven to externally driven. So now the goal becomes, do not spill the cup of water, keep it level, right? And then figure out how to move around that challenge. So all of a sudden now you're not focused on, hey, my foot should go here and I need to have this wide of a stance. The goal becomes, now I have to move in a pattern where I don't spill the water. And then what the coach does is that he puts the limitations on it. He creates the box that you're able to move within, saying that it has to involve a certain amount of jumps. It has to involve this position, this Kung Fu position, that Kung Fu position. And you have to figure out how to transition between the positions. So, and this is one of my pet peeves, is that it's what enables high performance across all sports is the ability to move between the static positions. So it's the translation from one position to the next that's the challenging part, because if you do it wrong, you're going to lose all the strength, the power, the force, the speed of it. But you do it right, then each movement will reinforce the next one. And that's the goal of being a really, really good fighter and having excellent fighting skill. So I actually love this kind of stuff. And there is quite a bit of research to back it up as well.
Excellent. All right. So now let's put it all together. All right. So from a Kung Fu perspective, obviously the drunken style is a little bit more for show than it is for practical fighting. It's in fact not even really a real style of Kung Fu. Was essentially created for performance. So I think for that world, this is a 5-fist montage, because it is the king of all drunken Kung Fu montage. It's the best. Drunken Master 2, which is such a great movie, still lacks a training montage. And that's why this one will always have a special place. So from the Kung Fu guy perspective, I give it 5 fists. Now, from the sport physiology perspective, and I know how much you like this movie, but purely from a sport physiology perspective, what's your rating?
My rating, I'm going to give it 4 fists. And the reason why it doesn't get 5 is because of the lack of load. Too much emphasis on a high rep amount which has value, but again, it's not the end all be all. You also need to add load to things. And then also what kind of it makes me want to give it a 4/5 rating is because of the motor control training sequence that we talked about with the staffs with the rope in it. If they had done it and we've seen just 1 or 2 seconds of him just going it through slow motion and then ramping up the speed, that would have made it so much more real in terms of from a sports physiology perspective.
Got it. Great. And I loved how you said you tried that out when you were a kid, when you first saw this. It shows that you were always a scientist at heart. Let's try it out. Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's Drunken Master. I look forward to doing another one of these with you. And thank you so much, everyone, for checking out the video. All right, guys. So what did you think about what we said today about these montages? Do you agree with us? Do you think we're full of crap? Let us know right in the comments. What kind of movies would you like me and Dr. J to do next time? Write that down there. Let us know. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Kung Fu Genius. And I look forward to hearing from you guys.